Hi, I'm Dan Sweet. I'm Director of Public Relations and Communications for Helicopter Association International, or HAI, and we're pleased that you joined us for our webinar today. Let's go ahead and get things started. I'll get my screen shared here. Helicopter Association International takes flight safety incredibly seriously. We are part of the U.S. helicopter safety team, and previously it was the International Helicopter Safety Team that has evolved now into the Vertical Aviation Safety Team. And so the Vertical Aviation Safety Team, or FAAST, held a safety conference in Dallas this last September. And they had a number of presenters. I got to attend and listen to a lot of the different things that were going on. One of the conversations, one of the courses, was a presentation called Sharing the Air with Drones. And as our industry changes, evolves, if you will, there's a lot more aircraft in the air today. And it's going to continue to grow and build. And right now, I know that there's a lot of work going into seek and avoid technology, identifying to avoid, but there's also a lot of keeping eyes on the other guys. And so I felt like this was a topic that we really should try to bring in. So let me go ahead and get things started. Let me introduce John. John is a West Point graduate who is currently working as an aviation safety analyst for the FAA FAAST team. He provides technical support, subject matter expertise, and uncrewed aircraft systems, UAS related support, to the general aviation UAS flying public. He also supports UAS specific training and supports the FAA FSDOs, FAA FAAST team program managers, and other FAA lines of business. He is a licensed helicopter, fixed wing, and drone pilot. So we'll bring him on in just a second. Our webinars, if this is your first time joining us, we try to make them as interactive as possible, so we encourage your questions. We will be asking or answering the questions at the end of John's presentation. I'm working alone today. Usually I have a couple of people helping me out. So please use the question module here in Zoom to ask your questions. You can chat amongst yourselves if you like, but I'm only going to be following the question and answer module today. This webinar is being recorded. We will provide a link to this webinar fairly soon. It usually takes us at least 24 hours to get the webinar posted to our YouTube channel and to our website. So do keep an eye out for that. If you feel like you want to go back and watch something again, if you wanted to share this, we highly encourage that as well. Talking with John today, we did have a question. So let me bring up my poll here. We want to find out exactly a little bit more demographic information here about you. So I'm going to give everybody about a minute to respond to the question. Are you a certificated drone pilot, a licensed helicopter pilot, both, or neither? And I apologize to you people who are fixed wing pilots, but we just were focusing on the rotary craft today. Looks like we're jumping up pretty quick, almost going to have 100% participation on the poll. So okay, it looks like it's leveling out here. I think it'll allow me to share the results here. Okay, we have 92% of you responding. I'm going to end the poll, and what we ended up with, share results here. 11 of you are certificated drone pilots. 23 of you are helicopter pilots. 19 of you do both. That's great. And 22% or 22 of you are neither, just like me. Okay. In that case, let me stop sharing and please ask John to bring up his camera and we'll begin his presentation.
All right.
John, did that help you with your audience question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. That was great. That really helps. And I'm pleased to see that we've got folks who do have some drone experience. And all of you who are already certificated helicopter and fixed wing, if you have a current flight review, you can get your Part 107 certificate at no cost. So something to think about. You have to have a current flight review to do that. And I would encourage you to do that. It will make you a better aviator if the more you know. So let me share my screen and I will go ahead and start into my presentation. I want to first thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. It is an honor and a privilege to be with my fellow aviators. It's always a group that I love talking with, and I hope that what I present to you today will make you safer and give you some things to think about, both from the manned aviator point of view and from the unmanned aviator point of view. And if you do have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. If I don't know the answer, we can get back to you. And this is my contact information. And I also want to give a special shout out to our colleagues who are from outside the United States. And I have lived in 3 different continents outside the United States. And both my kids were born in Amsterdam. And I used to work for a British company. And I've spent lots of years in South America and in Asia, and the Middle East. So I consider myself an international person as well, and I recognize there's some interesting views as well that we can always learn from each other. So without further ado, let me go into it. So I like to use this slide this is my attention getting slide, because when I talk to folks, both inside the industry and outside the industry, I find that many are shocked to find out that there have in fact been 7 confirmed collisions between helicopters and drones in the United States. There have been more others outside the United States, but in the United States, we've had 7 confirmed collisions, and 3 of those collisions occurred below 400 feet. And 4 of those occurred obviously above 400 feet above ground. And there's a slide at the end of my presentation about this Chilean Navy helicopter that had a collision with a 20-ounce drone. And it's very personal to me because I used to be an instructor pilot on that particular aircraft, and I used to sit in that seat, and it's quite an attention getter. And there's been 2 NTSB deemed probable collisions between a drone and a small GA fixed wing aircraft doing traffic patterns, teaching students at airports as well. So I like to put this out there to try and burst the bubble that many of our colleagues live in, who think erroneously that drones pose little to no risk to other aircraft. That is completely incorrect, and the facts show that. Probability may be low, but you don't want to be the one who gets hit, and hopefully this presentation will help avoid that. So let's talk about a real case that happened in, I believe it was April last year. This really did happen. This is not a hypothetical. This is a near miss or a near midair. It took place between a drone and an A-Star helicopter down in El Paso, Texas. And here's the report. It's redacted a little bit, obviously, but this is the report that came into the FAA and to the Flight Standards District Office, which kicks off an investigation when that happened. And it was, and I'll show you more about it, but this took place. The helicopter was departing a hospital inbound to the El Paso airport, and the altitude reported is in MSL, mean sea level, but which translates to about 300 feet above the ground. And wait do you see this? This is, for me as a helicopter pilot, this is really attention getting. So who, what, when, where, and how? This was a hot and high kind of a day. El Paso area does have density altitude issues. And this took place early in the morning, rising sun in the east, 86 degrees, clear sky, visibility 10 miles, greater than 10 miles, ceiling and visibility unlimited, right? What we call a CAVU day, perfect day for flying. A little bit warm for the engine. So the helicopter was departing a hospital, a little bit power limited, no patients, but en route back to the airport. Not sure why they were en route back to the airport. Either could have been a crew change or some maintenance, what have you, but it was very close by, as you'll see. The drone is a very popular model. It was a DJI Mini 2. The dimensions are about a foot wide by 3/4 of a foot long and 2 inches, 4 centimeters tall, which I like to equate it. One of our birds here in the United States is a blue jay, and it's when it has its wingspan, it's about the same size. And so that's a little bit of an attention getter. Weighs a half a pound. And the scenario was that a construction company was doing some work at a local high school tennis court. They hired a certificated drone pilot, hired to come out and take some pictures of the construction area. And the drone pilot came out, parked his car as close as he could to the location of the subject area, and the rest will come to. So these pictures are not in scale, but they hopefully will point out a few interesting things. So notice on the left here, the helicopter was at 272 feet above ground level. The drone was at 371 feet above ground level, which means the helicopter actually flew under the drone by less than 100 feet. And this is the location of the unmanned pilot here. He's down on a street corner, and you can see the tennis courts, which were the subject of his interest. And so this is the location, and we'd like to thank SPS ARS for the data. That both the helicopter pilot and the drone pilot did cooperate with us to give us this data. So it's quite an eye-opening situation that we wanted to talk about. So the first thing I want to point out is that the drone pilot was legit and legal to be there. So it was a certificated drone pilot. His knowledge was current. He did not need an airspace authorization in that location because he was outside controlled airspace. So it's class Golf, class G, and he's below 400 feet. So he's legit to be there. So the picture on the left is a satellite image, obviously, and this is the approximate flight path. It's not the exact flight path. The exact flight path was a little more curvy, but you get the general idea. They took off from this hospital helipad here and essentially flew generally eastwardly, and that's the high school there. And I want you to notice the Tom Lee Upper Park. Keep that in mind. You'll see this. I'm going to bring this up in another slide, but the drone pilot was not there, but this is an interesting place, especially for you drone pilots. I want you to think about that when I come to it. But so the X on the left picture marks the approximate location of the near midair. On the right, you'll see this is a visual flight rules sectional, and this is the sectional map, and you can see the X marks the spot, the approximate spot. And one of the things I want to point out to the non-drone pilot community that's on here today is that, and I'll cover this again later, but notice the structures here at 4,182 feet MSL, 475 feet AGL. We want you to understand that a drone pilot flying under Part 107 is legally allowed in Class G to be up to 400 feet above that. So they could be at 875 feet, and as long as they stay within 400 feet of the sides of that structure, they are legal. So keep that in mind. It's another point we want people to understand, is that they can be higher than 400 feet and legal. Okay. So now these are pictures that I stitched together from some photos that we got from the inspector who went down and took some pictures there. I apologize, the stitching doesn't go quite all the way, but this is the street, and where the arrow to the right comes up from, that this is basically the corner where the drone pilot stood. You can see the helicopter path generally flew from west to east across the top of the high school, or in that general area. And this is the view the drone pilot rather had noticed. He has some obstructions to his vision, and drone pilots who are on here, look at this tree up here on the street. That's Tom Lee Park, and look at the altitude that park is. And I don't have it in this slide show, but you can go to Google Earth and see for yourself that had the drone pilot started his operation from there, they would have had unlimited visibility of down to the horizon in almost 360 degrees. So site selection matters. The other thing I want to point out is to the community here today is that, so this escarpment here, notice his vision was blocked of his subject area. He could not see the subject area, so he had no possible way of knowing if there were people there as well. So he had to rely on the onboard camera, which that's when it starts getting a little bit naughty. So this is some interesting information here. So on the picture on the left, this is a snapshot. This isn't exactly the time. This is not the time when the near miss happened, but you'll see some data here that's very interesting. The yellow line is the flight path of the drone. And you'll notice how the drone pilot takes off, flies down the street a little bit, comes back over the houses, over to the other neighborhood. And notice he's kind of moving around in an arc, and he's clearly trying to get pictures from different angles of his subject area, right? So you can see from this data, he's moving around quite a bit, all in a general arc of his subject area. And the drone when this particular snapshot was taken was at 234 feet. It's about 355 feet away from him. And it was moving at 16.8 miles an hour in the horizontal axis, but not moving anywhere out of the vertical axis. It was this, and now that's at this particular time, but at the time of the near midair, he was apparently traveling near zero. So it was essentially a hovering drone that's a foot wide. So think about that. Notice he's also had, at this time, he's been flying for about 14 minutes. He's got 43% battery life. And where do you think this drone pilot is looking while he's doing this operation? Is he looking at the airspace, or is he looking at his subject on the camera? I think you can make your own decision that way, but think about where that person is looking and what their real role is. So let's talk about relative position, relative size, and background and contrast. Right, this is a Blue Jay, and it's got a wingspan of approximately 1 foot. This is the drone. It's got a wingspan of approximately 1 foot. This is the same two objects made smaller, obviously. And notice the drone against a white background, a gray drone on a gray background. You're not going to be able to see it, right? And notice how small it is. And if you're going 100, 120 knots, think about your ability to detect that, especially if it's hovering, and your ability to detect it and then avoid it, right? So think about that. Let's take another view of this. We've done some studies many years ago, and you'll see it in the advisory circular 60-48 Echo, or it might be 90-48 Echo. It's the pilot's role in collision avoidance. But the FAA did some studies many years ago and determined that it takes on average, and I put in parentheses there, an undistracted pilot, it takes them on average 12.5 seconds to detect, decide, and act to another airborne threat. And in a helicopter traveling at 100 knots, that's about a half a mile or a kilometer to do that. So so the question is, if you're flying in these arrows here, and I like the one on the left, the picture on the left, number 1, if you can see the moon there, but if that was a drone and the drone pilot was at the position number 1, and you come blowing over here at 100 knots, how many seconds do you think that drone pilot's going to have to really react to you? Not much, right? Not much. So same here in a more urban environment, obstructions to vision, and over here in the field, of course, same thing. A lot of obstructions to vision from where we are operating. So let's talk a little bit about the drones itself. I apologize, this is a busy slide, but something that I think it's important for you to understand that when people talk about small drones in the United States or small UAS, they're talking about drones that weigh under 55 pounds, 25 kilos. So that's kind of how we delineate small and not small. And there are more than 800,000 small drones that are registered in the United States, but that number doesn't really tell the whole story. That number there's more than those numbers because the way we register drones, if you're a recreational flyer, you can have more than one drone under the same registration number. If you're flying under Part 91 as a public aircraft operator, or if you're flying under Part 107 as a non-recreational civil operator, then each drone has to be registered. So the numbers that show under Part 107 registration are hard numbers. The numbers that show under recreational flyers, those are, I think, estimates really. They could have more than one drone registered, so there could be more. So that's the message here: is there's probably more than 800,000 drones that are out there flying, because we haven't even talked about the drones that are not even registered that should be registered, right? So there's a lot of them out there, and in comparison, in the United States, there's less than 300,000 manned aircraft that are registered. So already, in the 5 years or 6 years that drones have been operating in the United States, it's already 3 times more than manned aircraft. And that's the registered ones, right? It's probably even more for those that are unregistered. So something else important, I've heard a lot of discussion over the years about, hey, ADS-B out. Just understand that drones in the United States are prohibited from transmitting ADS-B out without express approval from the FAA, and we don't give that out very much. We do make a few exceptions, but those are very rare. The Department of Interior, for example, does have approval to put ADS-B out on some of their drones, and there are a few waivers and exemptions that give this, but on the whole, small drones do not have ADS-B out. They are allowed to have ADS-B in, but as many of you know, not all manned aircraft have ADS-B out. And so this can be sometimes create a false sense of security on both sides. The other thing it's important for the American operators here to understand is that according to the FCC rules, they are not allowed to transmit on aviation spectrums. So they can listen, they're allowed to have handhelds, but they're not allowed to transmit without a ground station license. I know the FCC is looking at different spectrum issues right now, but understand that if you're going to broadcast in the blind, they're technically not allowed to answer you back unless they have that ground station license. And I understand that those are not given out very, very often. Drones, these small drones do not have onboard detect and avoid systems. And as I mentioned earlier, you can see here, this is the actual rule, the 14 Code of Federal Regulations, and that's the number there. But drones are allowed under Part 107 to be legal above 400 feet and when it's around a tower or a structure. They are required to give way to you at all times, but that, of course, assumes that they see you in time and they can determine that you're a threat and they can get out of your way. And in those collisions where we have found the drone pilot, 100% of those drone pilots said they did not see the manned aircraft in time, and they really thought they'd hear you, and they were shocked that they didn't. Of course, they don't understand that environmental noise can affect that, and also density, air density, right? There's so many factors that affect noise and sound, reflection off buildings. So they don't understand that. They all think that you'll never be 400 feet or below. And we're educating them all the time, but you need to be aware of this because this is the environment that you're operating in, and we just want you to understand that. And all of them who had these collisions, and we found them, they all admitted that they were not watching the airspace. They were watching the screen in front of them, right? They were screen watching, I call it. And remember, for those of you who are drone pilots, that your first job as a drone pilot is see and avoid. it's not just watching your drone, it's watching the airspace around the drone. And that's not a well understood concept, and we're working to educate people on that. But this is reality. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is that the other thing we need you to understand is that we are writing waivers and some exemptions for people to do other things such as beyond visual line of sight. So just be aware of that. Now, I talk a lot with public safety, and I hear a lot about combined efforts, and particularly in areas where a hurricane or a wildland fire has happened or some other natural disaster. And I know sometimes there's friction between the helicopter community and the drone community, but I think we need to shed that, and we need to understand that we're complementary assets. We're not competitive assets. And what a helicopter can do, drones cannot do. And so there's always going to be a place for helicopters. There's always going to be a place for drones. There are some times where me as a helicopter pilot, I don't want to go anywhere near that confined area, or maybe there's an area where there's an active shooter, and a drone is way better of an asset to use. It's way more suited for that kind of operation. So let's change our thinking on, hey, these are complementary assets. Let's think about them in our air missions, and let's bring them all together. And when I talk with manned pilots and unmanned pilots in public safety in particular for these events, they talk about the air boss and bringing people together. And then I hear that, well, the playbook goes right out the window. And but just remember that for your safety, it's probably best to follow that playbook. And if you establish an altitude of 500 feet, for example, stay at 500 feet. And if you need to get lower, make a call, do something, coordinate that. There is a amazing video on the National Transportation Safety Board Carroll system, an amazing video of a collision that took place between a drone and a helicopter filming a race. I think it was called Hammer King, and it was in California. And you can watch that video, and it's unbelievable because those crews both knew about the presence of each other. They did not employ mitigations saying, okay, you stay on the right side of the road, I'll stay on the left side of the road. Nope, they didn't even coordinate, and they went out, and the drone pilot was the camera operator and the pilot and the visual observer, right? Trying to do all those roles, task saturated. They had a collision, and it's on film. It's amazing to watch, and it's totally preventable, that one especially. And then assume the drones are going to be everywhere. You're not going to see them. You're not going to see them in time to get out of their way. They're supposed to get out of your way. They are not going to see you in time to get out of your way. And wear eye protection. This is, and here's I'll show you later about why wearing eye protection matters. So what happens if you do have a drone strike? I've added these slides. Those of you who saw my presentation during the FAAST conference, I've added a couple extra slides because what we've noticed is people don't know what to do if they've, hey, I think we hit a drone. Well, in the United States, if you hit a drone, remember, drones are aircraft by law. If you hit a drone, you've had a midair collision with another aircraft, and you need to report that to the National Transportation Safety Board. There's the number, and they may ask you to do a SNARG test to eliminate the possibility that it was a bird. And interestingly enough, I saw a beautiful presentation at the FAAST conference from an entity that works with the Smithsonian. They have DNA on, I think it's over 2,500 different bird species. And one of the reasons they may ask you to do this is it helps them for bird mitigations as well. And there are some studies identifying what birds are happening, what bird strikes are happening, where are they happening, what altitudes are they happening. So it's a really good thing to do the SNARG test anyway. And then also check to make sure it wasn't a maintenance issue, because you'll see in my bottom right bullet there, believe it or not, when investigations start happening for most of these drone strikes, they turn out to be not a drone strike. We just had one recently that's starting to look like a maintenance issue. Somebody left a part, or a part came loose and did the damage, and blamed on the drone. And the investigation determined it wasn't a drone, it was something else. We've had situations where pilots have hit trees or hit a building. Oh, it was a drone. They're going to investigate. They're going to find out it wasn't a drone. The drones leave specific patterns and marks, and it's usually, and usually there's pieces around. So it's not always a drone. But if you really do think you had a drone strike, you are obligated to report it. And this is the rule, the Code of Federal Regulations. This is a National Transportation Notification requirement. And I put this in here because the community isn't getting that. Drone pilots, by the way, you also have reporting requirements. There are certain things that the NTSB requires of you as an incident, not an accident. But so, for example, if you have a true flyaway or total failure, you are supposed to report that to the NTSB, not necessarily the FAA, but the NTSB. So, and also 830.6 tells you what you need to report. 830.10 says what you're supposed to do with the aircraft. And so take a look at that. All right, so this is for my Argentinian friends who are on here. And if there's any Chilean people, they'll know this too. I used to fly this kind of helicopter. I used to sit in that left seat, but this really did happen in Chile. And it was at 800 feet. And that drone is, again, it's about a foot across, weighs 20 ounces, and it did that kind of damage to the windscreen of the Jet Ranger there. I used to fly an OH-58, and I used to sit right there. So, and it hit the mechanic who was in the left seat and cut him up pretty bad. They had to divert, and it was an emergency. He needed surgery. So can you imagine if that was hit the pilot, right? We all know that would have been a very unhappy ending. So wear that eye protection, expect drones to be everywhere, get up above 400 feet as quick as you can, and not just 400 feet, but 400 feet above the highest obstacle or obstruction. And when we talk to other communities, particularly those of you who are in public safety or EMS or ag work, go educate these groups, go out there and teach them what you do, help them understand about risk. Most of them they're not getting risk, and they don't understand that their little tiny drone can really ruin our day, right? So go out there, mentor them, work with the FAAST team. We have FAAST team program managers in every flight standards district office. We also have a cadre of civilian non-FAA volunteers called Drone Pros. They will be more than happy to help you work with them. News organizations, again, if you're regularly operating in a particular area, you go out there and talk to them. If you're a helicopter operation, EMS, and go talk to that fire department, go talk to that police department, because they got drones now. They have drones and they're using them, and they're flying near your helipads, right? So help them understand that there is real risk. Help them understand what you need. They can help you understand what they need. And then there was a great best practice that was suggested to us from one of our FISDOs that they found that one of the EMS entities, I believe it was in Louisiana, I'm not sure, but they learned that some of these police departments in the vicinity had gotten drone detection gear, and they call them saying, hey, we're coming out to this location. Do you see any drones up there? And they'll say, yeah, we got one on 5th and Elm. And okay, I'll so have your dispatcher check into that, have your dispatcher. Remember that in the United States, drone detection is allowed for state and local. Drone mitigation is not allowed for state and local at this time. So that's in the purview of certain federal entities only. But detection is allowed. But that would be between you and them, and the FAA wouldn't be involved with that. But it's a great idea. So I believe that's it, Dan. So yep. So happy to answer any questions if I can.
Okay, there we go. Thanks, John. That was every bit as interesting is when I saw it there in the Dallas area. We do have a handful of questions, and if pattern repeats itself, we'll probably end up with a few more questions as we ask these.
Okay.
I had a question from Tim. This one's pretty simple. Can we show your contact information again? I think that was one of your first slides.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And these slides are available. HAI's got them. So, you can also ask Dan for them as well. There it is. I do give autographs for free.
Regretfully, it doesn't sound like you'll be able to join us for Heli Expo, but
No, I'm sorry about that.
and it's interesting. One of our Salute to Excellence winners this year in law enforcement is a drone program developer and from the San Francisco Bay Area. So,
Nice.
let's see. The question from Linda wanted to know if the drone in the El Paso area had its anti-collision lights on or any other lights on.
Great question. We don't believe they had anti-collision lights at all. And that is a great point, Linda. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because when I do this presentation for the drone community, that's one of the things I tell them is put an anti-collision light on. Remember, in the drone world, anti-collision lights are only required when they fly at night. But when you go out and talk to them, please do encourage them to put anti-collision lights on during the day. Some of them will resist that because, oh, you kill my battery life. Well, that's a lot cheaper than a lawsuit, right? So that's a great question. And but no, they did not have anti-collision lights. And in fact, all the collisions that we've talked to, none of them had anti-collision lights on. Some of them may have had position lights, but the position lights on these small drones are not, you're not going to see them. And there's, in my opinion. Great question.
James,
thank you for that.
Yeah, James just commented there's a lot of really cheap LEDs out there too. So, even if you have a little battery powered, button battery.
Yeah, listen, contrast really works. So this is a message for you, those of you who are my drone community out there. Contrast works, right? If your drone is gray and you're flying on a gray background, these aviators are not going to see you. These helicopter pilots are not going to see you. If your drone is orange and it's on a white background, it's a better, you're more conspicuous, right? Conspicuity, background matters. Think about it, that all these drones, it helps, anything that helps, right? And then the other message for the drone community is who's the camera operator and who's the pilot? Because your job is the pilot, right? So the pictures are secondary. The regulations require you have to have not only visual line of sight, but also see and avoid. Whether you fly under Part 107 or under Part 91, you still have to see enough of the airspace down to the horizon, right? Because I know a lot of them say, well, I can see my drone. That does not meet the criteria. And that's a big shocker to a lot of the drone folks.
Ryan's got an interesting comment and question. Having had a helicopter have a close call in the summer of 2019, where our pilot was able to actually grab the drone from the air after landing at the hospital, what are the regulations in place for protected airspace around heliports and airports?
Well, the first thing they should have done is report that to the WASH control center, and because that is a serious issue, right? And so there's I could think of probably 5 or 6 violations that probably occurred. And I would bet, though, that person who was flying that drone was probably uncertificated, was flying a drone that was not registered. So there's a whole slew of issues there. And by the way, there is a Department of Justice criminal code. It's called 18 USC 39B. And drone community, you need to read that, because you can go to jail for life if you kill or hurt somebody with a drone. Check it out. But so, yeah, there's now, if that helipad was in uncontrolled airspace, right? Many of them are in Class G, so there wouldn't be an airspace restriction there. And drones are allowed to fly around Class G airports and helipads, but they are required to not interfere and to give way at all times. So there's no restriction per se around a Class G helipad other than stay out of the way and always give way and never interfere.
I'm going to express my ignorance here on the technology side of it. I had thought that there was supposed to be some sort of a technology that was built into the drones, as it was manufactured, that would prevent it from entering certain areas around, say, airports.
Yeah, there is. Well, that's the geofencing myth, I call it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of the drones that are sold in the United States do come with some sort of geofencing, which is essentially a software that is programmed in that it knows it's approaching some restricted area or it's going above a certain height. But there's plenty of hackers out there and plenty of opportunities to disable that or do something to it. So don't count on that. And in fact, I know of a case where a Part 107 certificated pilot was demonstrating a product at a prison, started up the drone inside the geofenced area, flew it out to demonstrate it. And guess what? The drone couldn't come back because the drone recognized that it was coming into a geofence prohibited area, and it kind of stopped and hovered. And the guy went up to grab it and he lacerated his hand. There's just a whole lot of issues there. But so yeah, that's called geofencing and no guarantee. Okay.
Well, as I pointed out to somebody earlier, technology is supposed to make our lives easier, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. Tim has a question. Is there any requirement for drone operators, and maybe this is something that's even considered for the future, any requirement for drone operators to monitor radio traffic or communicate their intentions?
Communicate, no, because it'll clog up there's a lot of issues why. Remember that we're highly trained on how to do aviation speak on the radio. And remember when the student pilot first gets on the radio, that's what you're going to have. So that's one of the reasons. And those frequencies are generally congested as it is. The CTAF frequencies, they're not enough, right? How often have we flown around and heard somebody at another airport talking on that same frequency? So that's one of the reasons why the FCC is not keen on issuing ground station licenses. I forget what the other part of the question. Oh, monitoring. There's no prohibition on monitoring the CTAF by the drone pilot, and I would encourage it. However, there are limitations, and again, creates false sense of security. Right? Not everybody will talk on the radio coming in. They're supposed to. They're supposed to announce attentions. Maybe the radio's not working. Maybe remember, radio sometimes gets affected by line of sight issues as well. Weather can affect, right? So there's a lot of issues. So yeah, but you are allowed as a drone pilot to, go out and buy your handheld and listen. You are allowed to do that. You just can't transmit. And I've talked to the FCC about that one.
Okay, Phil is asking for the collisions that you addressed in your presentation. Were any of the, or maybe any known collisions at night?
The one in Chile was at night. Yes, there was one in Los Angeles that was at night. The Los Angeles Police Department happened at night. The rest, I believe, were in daylight. One happened in Alaska, a few in California. There was the Army Black Hawk one in Manhattan. And I think only one at night was the LAPD one, but I'm not sure. But you could find that out on the NTSB Carroll database and not take my word for it.
Well, that brings up a question that Darren had. Is there a publicly accessible database of drone enforcement from the FAA, or is it just for collisions on the NTSB?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're actually working on publicizing when the final decisions are made. We used to have a threshold minimum that was not met very often, but I believe all enforcements are public knowledge, but I'm not sure. I'd have to research that.
Okay, Jason wants to know why drones are forbidden from broadcasting an ADS-B out signal.
Well, it's my understanding that it's a physics issue and a congestion issue, that ADS-B, when ADS-B and the transponder codes were were agreed between the different countries. The USA was allowed a certain number of squawk codes, I believe it was, squitter codes. I'm not an expert on that stuff, but what I'm told is there's two main reasons. One is that that frequency is already congested. And remember how I showed that we have over 800,000 drones that are registered, and there's probably a lot more that are unregistered. And there's less than 300,000 manned aircraft that are registered. And the air traffic control is already experiencing some congestion and interference at some of the major Class B airports already. So just piling more users in there is not going to help. And now that leads me to remote ID, I can talk about that too, but this audience, so remote ID, remote identification of drones is coming. Drones are going to it's going to be transponder-like. It's going to transmit certain information within a certain range, a very close range, and you're going to be able to identify where it is and that sort of thing. But are the avionics companies going to add that as an option for you to buy? I don't know. You have to ask them.
Well, here's a good question that kind of fits along with that change in technology. With the rise in, I think it's first-person video drones, FPV drones, where the operator is wearing a set of goggles.
Yep.
How are drone operators able to maintain line of sight with those types of drones?
Yeah, great question.
And are those limited in size and to certain altitudes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So beyond visual line of sight, when you operate a drone under Part 107, for example, even if you're wearing goggles, if you are wearing goggles, you must have a visual observer with you, co-located with you. But what's not well understood is that even if you're operating the goggles, you still have to be able to take them off immediately, look up and see your drone and the surrounding airspace. So both the remote pilot and the visual observer need to be able to see the drone at all times during the flight, but only one need to be doing it at that particular time. So it is considered beyond visual line of sight. If you're just flying around with goggles on, you cannot possibly, if you're using the camera on the drone, remember the camera's got a field of view like this, right? You cannot see 360 degrees of the airspace down to the horizon. So you're not complying with the line of sight requirements if you're flying with goggles and don't have a visual observer and are not able to take them off and see it if you need to. That's a complicated answer, but
well, I've got a follow-up question from Mark Minnie, who's one of our regular viewers. How long before you personally believe that civilian drone pilots will be required to be a two-person operation, a heads-up pilot, photographer, head into the screen, so two people at least working with a drone?
I know of some entities that are doing that right now. It's really up to the entity. This reminds me of what's the definition of a person in the Code of Federal Regulations. Look up 14 CFR 1.1, the definition of a person. It's not just the drone pilot. Could be the company, could be there's a whole slew of people that could be on the hook, right? So for the drone pilot, like a manned aviator, is ultimately responsible for making those decisions. And I can tell you that one of the things I've learned, and so will there be legislation on this? I don't know. Maybe. Will there be a regulation, a rulemaking for this? I don't know. Maybe. It's an inadequate answer for you, but I can tell you that I know for me, what I've learned from this is there needs to be at least two roles. If I'm going to go film something or take pictures of something, and I know a lot of entities have, in fact, I had a conversation with some public safety entities who left the meeting I did, and they said, wow, you know what? It's a three-man crew. It's a three-person crew now. I'm like, yeah, it ought to be, right? In John's opinion, because the drone pilot is responsible for flying the drone. Now, and the analogy I use is, when a helicopter or a fixed wing crew goes out to do a filming job, is the helicopter pilot flying doing the Sony cam too? No, No way, right? Because their job is to see and avoid. Their job is to fly the aircraft. These are aircraft. You are a pilot, and you are an aviator, and you will be held accountable for your decisions. And so there have been certificate actions against drone pilots who should have known better. And, and again, right, you're not going to, you have to be able to defend your decisions. And sometimes it's all right, and sometimes not. But there's a wide leeway under the rules. But so when will that happen? I don't know if it'll ever happen. Is the drone pilot responsible in those collisions? Yes. Yes, they are.
Okay, Olivia has a question from the other side of the virtual fence, if you will. Are there any technologies that exist or might be in development for aircraft or airports / other sensitive locations to repel drones? Not pre-programming geofencing, but active measures to keep aircraft from, to keep drones away, but not destroy them.
I believe those do exist. I'm not privy to what they are. I think the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice and the Department of Energy are allowed to do mitigations today. And I think they already have. So it's not allowed at the state and local level, though, I can tell you that today. And there is, if you email me, I can send you an advisory that we've prepared with the Department of Justice and the Department of Energy and the DoD on countermeasures and detection. Happy to send that out. It was written in 2020 too, by the way, 2020.
Okay, this is a little off subject. I don't know if this would be something you'll have an answer. Bob is wanting to know if any idea when the FAA will have the official vertiport designs available.
No idea.
Okay, not a problem.
I mean, there's a lot of discussion about vertiports and advanced air mobility and all that stuff. So I have no idea. There's some conferences going on right now about that. There are discussions going on about it, but sorry, I don't know enough about that one.
Okay, Darren believes, along with you, an enforcement database would be useful to use for educational purposes.
Yeah.
Sort of a carrot versus a stick. Jacob has a comment. I am a drone operator at a training company. We practice and preach filing NOTAMs at least 24 hours prior to operations. We also monitor local helicopter frequencies. We also use visual observers and train best practices for watching airspace.
Great.
What other techniques can we begin teaching the next generation of operators so that helicopters are more aware of our operation? I'm curious from your perspective if you had any other recommendations.
Well, I believe there needs to be a lot more positive, constructive conversations between the helicopter community and the drone community. I have sensed some friction sometimes. Sometimes they're viewed as competitors. I think that's a mistake, but that's, everybody can free to have their own view. So I really do recommend bringing them together. The other thing, one of the things I did before I came to the FAA is I used to work at a company that evaluated Part 135 companies against a certain standard, and I used to run a fixed base operation with a lot of corporate jet tenants is the word I'm looking for, and I've had conversations with big companies and state aviation entities that have helicopter units. And I asked them, I said, well, what are you doing about your drone pilots? And, I was like, what? I said, well, they are pilots. They have pilot records. They have maintenance. Are you talking to your drone pilots, like a city helicopter unit? I live in Fairfax County, Virginia. They have a helicopter. The police, there's a helicopter unit, right? Are they managing? And I don't know the answer to this, but maybe they ought to be managing the drone pilots and the drone maintenance, or maybe they ought to be at least working together, developing standard operating procedures and protocols on, hey, we're going to be called to a fire, or there's a car accident, and there's there's so many different scenarios, right? Work together, and you'll find that you'll figure out ways where you're not going to get in each other's way. You're going to operate safely. and you're going to enhance everyone's safety. And as far as educating the helicopter community, well, you know, drones are everywhere. Wear glasses, but the onus is on the drone pilot. You have to get out of their way, and you have to be able to react in time to get out of their way. Well, the only way you can react to them is you need to be in a place where you can see it far enough away. And remember, 100 knots, 12 and a half seconds, it's gone a half a mile. And that's for undistracted, right? So if you're distracted, if you're screen watching, you better be able to see a mile or more, and not just on a slant angle up to the top of the building, but all the way down to the horizon where those helicopters and ag aircraft might be coming from. So great question. I personally believe, and this is one of the reasons I'm here today, is that we need to think about, we're complementary assets, not competitive assets. Where do we work together? There are confined areas where drones are really well suited. There are things that they can't carry much payload right now. They can't winch people out, right? So there are beautiful ways to work together, and but you got to talk to each other and interact. That would be my suggestion. That's a great point, though.
We have a quick question from Gene, and I suspect this might come under the same response as hacking the technology, but what about requiring high visibility paint or reflective tape as a requirement for manufacturing or for commercial and hobbyist operators?
Yeah, again, that's what we call prescriptive rulemaking, and we're moving away from prescriptive of prescribing. And the second point is that, remember, drones, most drones are not type certificated. So these are you don't know where these motors have been made. You don't know where these propellers have been made. They don't have production manufacturing authority. These are consumer grade products, most of them, that and Part 107 was written, Part 107 and the recreational rules were written to enable low risk operations that gives people access to the airspace and introduces people to aviation as well. So now with the type certificated drones, as they start coming on board, you're going to see more, definitely more stringent criteria on the manufacturing and all of that. But as far as dictating paint, et cetera, I don't see that happening.
Okay,
but, but I have to say that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I've got, let's go with one final question. We're getting up close to the top of the hour. This came from Donna. Do you think the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC committee recommendation to change see and avoid responsibility below 400 feet AGL will happen?
That's a great question. Rulemaking is a long process, and I would encourage you all to get active and participate in that. I have my own personal views, but that's really probably not appropriate for this. But I do think that, remember, their role is advisory, and then there's going to be a rulemaking process, and the rulemaking process always does require public input and input from stakeholders like you to provide that input so that we can make an informed decision. If you don't participate, we're going to not maybe consider very important points. So they read. I've talked to the team that's worked on some of these rulemaking, and they tell me that, John, I think we got 50,000 comments on remote ID. They had to read every single one and, determine, does this make sense? And we actually did change a few things that we were thinking because of the input that we got. There were some really good ideas in that. So, so I don't know what's going to happen with that recommendation, but I can tell you that there's when that process starts moving forward into rulemaking, please do give us your thoughts. We do need your ideas. You're living it out there every day. You're seeing it, and we do take it seriously. And you could shape policy and rules that way.
Okay, John. Well, thank you so much for making this presentation on our webinar today. I think that the people who joined are people who might be willing to collaborate with you on these rulemaking committees and make comments, things like that. And so I'm really grateful you were able to come in and make this presentation for us today.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I'm really happy to help. And you know, I feel like I have a foot in both parts of the industry, and it's very exciting for me to hope that I've planted a few seeds to maybe make some folks maybe do things a little differently to make them safer. So, and I appreciate very much all the efforts that you all do, especially in our communities. No kidding, it's great. My pleasure.
Okay, well, thank you so much, John. I'll let you turn off your screen here so I can share things. We'll get things wrapped up here very, very quickly.
All right. Will
Thanks,
do.
John.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Okay, we just have a few little housekeeping things to wrap up. We do have upcoming webinars. We do try to focus our webinars on the second and fourth Thursdays of every month. Our next webinar coming up in February 9th is going to be digital flight rules. Everybody knows about visual flight rules, instrument flight rules. What's going to change here with digital? This kind of fits along with the same topic that we just addressed. The RTCA is an exceptionally good organization, and this presentation, I think, will be of equal interest to this audience. February 23rd, it's going to be more for people who are members of HAI or thinking about becoming members of HAI. We've got a new legal services program that we're going to roll out, and we have Sarah McLeod from a local law firm that's going to come in and talk about this new program. Regretfully, we are a litigious society anymore, and I think that this program will be helpful to just about everybody. March 9th would have been our next webinar, but that is the final day of HAI Heli Expo. We certainly would encourage everybody who can to visit Atlanta and attend HAI Heli Expo. It's one of the coolest shows on the planet as far as I'm concerned. I'm kind of a junkie that way. I love seeing all the new technology, all the new aircraft, all the bright, shiny helicopters that are going to be there on the show floor. So what we're going to do is Jim Viola, President and CEO of HAI, is going to be giving a press conference one of the first days of the show. We will record that. We will show that the next week on March 16th. Where Jim will talk about how things look for the entire rotorcraft industry, talk to some of the manufacturers. He's got information on insurance, just any number of different topics within the industry. So, we hope you'll join us for that one. We would like your feedback. We do appreciate taking the time. We will be trying to get a survey out to you here very shortly. We ask that you take just a few minutes to let us know what you thought about today's webinar. If there's any ideas you have for future webinars, we do try to pay attention to all of that information and pass it out accordingly. HAI is a membership organization. We rely on our members to support us, and so we want to support you. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What can we do better? Best way to respond to that is to let Jim Viola know directly. Please send him an email at president@rotor.org. He does address all of those comments that come in. As with our webinar today, we like to share information at HAI. There's a couple different ways that we do that, including this and any other number of programs, working groups, things like that. Two of the easiest ones are Rotor Daily and Rotor Magazine. Rotor Daily, we produce it every business day. We have a team of people, literally a team of people, going through Google searches and other sources, finding all the relevant information for the rotorcraft industry that's available on that particular day. And so instead of having to make you do it, just subscribe to Rotor Daily. We'll send it to your inbox. It goes out every day about 12 noon Eastern time. When I was living on the West Coast, I used to love taking a mid-morning break, take my coffee, and catch up on the day's news. It doesn't take long. You can watch it, read it whenever you like. Rotor Magazine is an award-winning publication that we produce quarterly that has more in-depth stories, more stories about what's going on in the industry. What's the great thing about both these products is they're free. There used to be a TV pitchman where I grew up that free is a very good price. It's hard to argue with that concept. All you have to do is go to rotor.org/subscribe and sign up for these. For international viewers, there is a small fee for mailing the magazine, but you can get the digital version of Rotor Daily and you can get the digital version of the magazine for free. It just depends on if you want the print copy to leave on the desk at your FBO or something like that. And that does wrap things up for us today. I appreciate that John was able to join us again and present this information to you. Until our next webinar, we hope that you fly safe, you be safe, and we'll see you again very, very soon.